I want to tell you something before this story begins. I'm not telling it because I want your sympathy. I'm not telling it to settle a score or correct the record or make anyone look bad. I'm telling it because there's a chemotherapy chair in a hospital on the 3rd floor of St. Augustine Medical Center, and I've been sitting in it every other Thursday for 4 months. And the view out the window is a parking lot where it's currently snowing. And the Christmas music coming through the overhead speakers is the same loop it's been since November. And I have more time to think than I have ever had in my life. I'm telling it because I spent 15 years practicing silence. I think I've earned the right to speak now. My name is Ethan Walker. I am 38 years old. I have stage 4 lymphoma, and less than a year to live, and the people I love most in the world still believe I betrayed them. I never corrected them. That's what this story is about. The last Christmas we were all together, I was 23 years old. My sister Sophia was 19. My father, Robert, was 54 and had the specific bearing of a man who had built everything he had with his own hands and trusted that the people he loved would honor that. My mother, Linda, made the same 7 dishes every Christmas, not because they were her favorites, but because they were ours, and she had spent 20 years learning the precise difference. She knew that Sophia wanted the sweet potatoes without the marshmallow topping, and that I would eat 3 helpings of anything as long as she made it, and that my father needed his coffee before the gifts and not after. She paid attention. That was her language. We were not a wealthy family. We were not a remarkable one. We were 4 people who had learned the specific geography of each other, the rhythms, the sore spots, the private jokes, the particular silences that meant different things depending on who was holding them. We were a family that worked because everyone in it had decided, without ever saying so explicitly, to keep working at it. The house was too small for how much noise we made. Christmas lights my father had strung every year since I was 6 framed the front windows, one strand always slightly off from the others because he refused to buy a new set when the old ones still technically functioned. Sophia had complained about those lights since she was 15. That Christmas, she came downstairs in the morning, looked at the window and said, "Dad, one strand is crooked." And my father said, without looking up from his coffee, "I know." And Sophia said, "It's been crooked for 3 years." And my father said, "I know that too." I watched her try not to smile. She failed. That morning, Christmas morning, the last one, she pulled me aside in the kitchen while our parents were in the living room. She smelled like the vanilla body spray she'd been wearing since she was 16. And she had the look she got when she needed something and didn't know how to ask for it directly. "I might go stay with Jenna for a few days," she said, "after New Year's." Jenna was her college roommate. "Okay," I said. "I might stay longer than a few days." I looked at her. She looked back, doing the thing she did, that younger sibling thing of transmitting a large amount of information through minimal actual words, and waiting for you to receive it. "How much longer?" I said. She shrugged one shoulder, the kind of shrug that means I can't say. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I'm fine." She said it in the specific way that means. "I'm not fine, but I'm not ready to tell you how not fine, so please just let me have this for now." I let her have it. We ate my mother's 7 dishes. My father burned the rolls and blamed the oven, which he had been blaming for 11 years. Sophia and I washed the dishes after dinner the way we always did. She washed, I dried, and she sang quietly to the radio while she worked, off-key, unbothered. It was an ordinary Christmas. I didn't know it was the last one. I didn't know that in 6 months, everything would be gone. She disappeared in January, not without warning technically. She left a note, short and careful, saying she needed time and not to worry. She took a bag and her savings, and whatever else fit into the back of Jenna's car. My mother cried. My father called everyone he could think of. I knew where she was. She'd texted me a single message, "I'm okay. Please don't tell them yet. I'll explain when I can." I didn't tell them. I said I didn't know. I said I was sure she'd reach out. I sat in the kitchen and watched my mother worry and my father's jaw tighten, and I held onto what I knew and told myself it was temporary. That she'd call. That she'd explain. I was 23. I believed that things that needed to be said eventually got said. I was wrong about that. It took me a long time to fully understand how wrong. She came back in July. I had 6 months of practice, by then at saying "I don't know" in a tone that sounded like truth. 6 months of watching my parents oscillate between anger and fear, and the particular exhaustion of parents who have done everything right and cannot understand why it hasn't been enough. 6 months of my mother setting the table with 4 plates out of habit, and then quietly removing one. Sophia came back on a Thursday afternoon, unannounced, thinner in her face and rounder everywhere else. She was 20 weeks pregnant. My mother went very still in the way she did when she was managing something large. My father stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at his daughter and didn't speak for long enough that the silence acquired its own weight. Then he looked at me. I don't know exactly what he saw. Whatever it was, it told him that I had known something. "Did you know where she was?" he asked. Before I could answer, Sophia said, "He helped me leave." The room changed. I looked at her. She looked at me, and in her eyes there was something I hadn't expected, not malice, not calculation, just terror. Pure animal terror. A 19-year-old girl who was pregnant and ashamed and standing in front of her father and reaching for the nearest thing that might absorb some of what was coming toward her. The nearest thing was me. "He helped me plan it," she said. "He drove me to Jenna's, he knew the whole time." None of it was true. I opened my mouth, and then I looked at her face, really looked at it, and I saw the girl who used to sing off-key at the kitchen sink, who couldn't make herself smile at the crooked Christmas lights, who had whispered "I'm not fine" asterisk to me in the particular code of people who have grown up together. I saw her the way you see someone you've known their entire life. All at once, every version of them layered over the present one. I closed my mouth. My father's voice, when it came, was quieter than I expected. "You helped her run away," he said, not a question. "Dad, you knew where she was for 6 months. You watched us." "It wasn't." "Don't." His voice had gone to the place it went when there was no more room in it for anything. "Don't explain it to me." My mother was looking at me. She had the expression of someone revising something, a long-held understanding, a settled belief, and watching it change in real time was one of the worst things I have ever seen. "Ethan," she said softly. It was just my name. She said it like a question she already knew the answer to. I said nothing. I had decided in the space of 30 seconds, standing in that kitchen, that I was not going to tell the truth. Not because I was guilty. Not because I couldn't defend myself. But because Sophia was 20 weeks pregnant and standing in front of our father and already falling apart, and the truth, the full truth, the real sequence of events would have destroyed her in that room, and I was not willing to do that. I told myself it was temporary, that she would correct it, that once things calmed down, once our father wasn't standing in the kitchen doorway with that look, she would tell them what actually happened. She didn't correct it. Not that day. Not the next. Not in the weeks that followed. My father asked me to leave on a Saturday morning, 2 weeks after Sophia came home. He said it quietly, which was worse than if he'd shouted. He said, "I think it's better if you find somewhere else to be for a while." I packed a bag. At the door, I stopped. I turned around. My mother was in the hallway, arms crossed, and she looked at me with something that I have carried with me ever since. Not hatred, which would have been easier, but grief. The grief of someone who loved you and had been handed a reason not to. "Mom," I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then she stepped back. I went through the door. My father said from behind me, in a voice so low I almost didn't hear it, "You are no longer my son." I walked to my car. I drove away. I did not let myself think about what I had just lost until I was far enough that no one could see me. Then I pulled over, and I sat there for a long time. In 15 years, I never stopped being grateful that no one could see me in that moment. Some things you protect, even when there's no one left to protect them for. I learned to live small. That's the only way I know how to describe the years after. You leave a life, or a life leaves you, and you discover that existence continues anyway, which is at first surprising, and then simply becomes the condition of things. I got a job on a construction crew outside the city. I slept in my car for 2 months until I had enough saved for a deposit on a room in a shared house with 4 other men I never learned much about beyond their work schedules and coffee habits. The room was 11 feet by 9 feet. I measured it. There was a window that faced a brick wall and a radiator that knocked through the night in a rhythm that I eventually stopped hearing, the way you stop hearing your own heartbeat. I worked, I saved. I moved to a slightly larger room. I worked more. I was not unhappy, exactly. Unhappy implies a baseline of happiness being subtracted from. What I had was closer to neutral, a life stripped of most of its texture, running at a low and manageable frequency. I had colleagues. I had a diner I went to on Sunday mornings where the woman behind the counter learned my order without being asked. I had the specific small pleasures of a life lived simply. The weight of physical work, the satisfaction of a thing built, the way a cold morning felt on your face when you'd been inside too long. I had the letters. The first one I wrote in November, 4 months after I left. I sat at the small desk in my small room and I wrote to my mother. I told her about the construction job and the shared house and the diner with the Sunday eggs. I told her about a dog I'd seen that week that had gotten its leash tangled around a parking meter and sat down in patient defeat and waited for someone to notice, and how a small girl had stopped and untangled it with such seriousness that it made me think of Sophia at 6 years old, fixing things with her whole face. I told her I didn't blame anyone. I told her I missed Sunday dinners. I folded the letter. I addressed the envelope. I sat with it in my hands for a long time. I didn't send it. I told myself I would send it later, when things were less raw, when some amount of time had passed that would make the words land differently. Later became next month. Next month became next year. I kept writing. I kept not sending. By the second Christmas, I had a box. It was a shoebox at first, the kind that dress shoes come in, plain brown cardboard. I labeled it in marker, maybe next Christmas. A joke to myself that wasn't entirely a joke. The letters went in. Cards I'd bought and written out and addressed and held and put away. Photographs I'd printed from disposable cameras of things I'd seen that I thought my mother would like. A particularly good sunset over the construction site. A cat that had taken to sleeping on the hood of my car. The first real meal I'd cooked myself in my own kitchen when I finally had one. The box filled slowly and then faster. By the 5th year, I needed a bigger box. By the 10th year, it was a plastic storage container, the kind with a lid that snapped shut. I kept it under my bed. I moved 4 times in 15 years, and it came with me every time, packed first, like something I might need immediately upon arrival. I never needed it immediately. I never sent any of it, but I wrote every Christmas without exception. Sitting at whatever table I had that year in whatever city, I'd moved twice, settled eventually in a mid-sized city 3 hours from home with whatever coffee I'd made, and I wrote to them. My mother, my father, Sophia, when I could bring myself to. I wrote about my year, about what I was reading, what I was building, what I was thinking about. I wrote about the ordinary things because the ordinary things were what I missed most. Not the holidays or the milestones, but the Tuesday evenings, the kitchen sink, the crooked Christmas lights that were probably still crooked, probably still bothering no one who was willing to admit it. I wrote as if I expected them to write back. They never did. They didn't know where I was. I'd never told anyone. That was the arrangement I had made with myself. I would not force my way back. If they wanted me, they knew how to find me. I would wait, and I would write, and I would put the letters in the box, and eventually, I believed this, I needed to believe it. Eventually, someone would open a door. The door stayed closed. I kept writing anyway. The things I knew about my family. I learned the way you learn about anyone you've lost, but haven't stopped watching from a distance. Sophia got married in June, 7 years after I left. I found the announcement in an online local paper. She still lived in our hometown, had eventually moved into a house 2 streets from our parents. Her husband's name was Daniel. He had a kind face in photographs, the face of a man who didn't require a great deal from the world and was content with what he had. I decided I liked him, on the evidence of his expression in photographs, which is a ridiculous thing to decide, but I decided it anyway. Their daughter was born the following spring. I found out through a birth announcement posted in the same local paper. 8 pounds, 2 ounces. They named her Claire. I sat with that for a long time. I had a niece. I would never be her uncle in any way that counted. She would grow up knowing, if she knew anything, that she had an uncle who had done something that meant he wasn't spoken of. She would learn the family's version of me, the outline of a person shaped by a lie Sophia had never corrected. I bought a card, a baby card with a yellow duck on it that seemed adequately cheerful. I wrote inside it, "Congratulations. I hope she is as stubborn and kind as her mother used to be." I signed it with my initial. I put it in the box. I attended my parents' 30th anniversary without attending it. I drove to their town, 3 hours, a Saturday in October, and I parked on a street 2 blocks from the restaurant where I knew, from the invitation that had been posted to a family Facebook page I had never commented on, the celebration was happening. I sat in my car and watched people go in and come out, and I thought about my father's hands, which were the hands of a man who had built things his whole life, and my mother's voice, which I hadn't heard in a decade and was beginning to blur at the edges in my memory the way things do when you're not feeding them. I drove home. I didn't go closer. I had told myself I wouldn't, and I kept to it. What I had not anticipated, what I'd never planned for, was what happened 2 years before the end of everything. My father got sick. It started with his heart, a structural problem, a valve, the kind of thing that requires surgery and significant recovery, and costs more than a construction worker's pension was ever designed to absorb. I found out through the family Facebook page. A post from Sophia asking for prayers that had gathered 87 comments of the supportive kind that meant the situation was serious enough to ask strangers for help. I looked at the post for a long time. Then I looked up the hospital. Then I did the thing that I have told no one, and that no one knows, and that I'm only telling now because there is no longer a reason to protect the secret. I called the hospital billing department. I explained that I was a family friend who wished to make an anonymous contribution toward Robert Walker's account. I gave them my credit card number. I asked them to note only that it was from a friend of the family. I did it again the following month. And the month after. I was not a wealthy man. I had what I had, which was the savings of someone who had lived carefully for many years without very much to spend on. I spent a significant portion of it on my father's medical bills, and I told myself it was fine, and it was fine. He recovered, I found out through the Facebook page. Sophia's post, "Dad came home today. We are so grateful," 83 comments. A photograph of my father in a chair by the window, thinner than I remembered him but upright, wearing the expression of a man who had decided not to die yet. I looked at that photograph for a long time. Then I closed the page and went to make dinner. He didn't know. He would never know. That was the condition of the gift, that it come from someone who didn't exist in his life anymore, which meant it could not come with anything attached to it. No obligation. No reopened door. Just the money, anonymous, quietly applied to a problem I could help with in the only way I had left. I ate dinner. I thought about his hands. I went to bed. The thing about a body is that it keeps records. I had spent 15 years in physical work, hauling, lifting, operating, building. My body had accumulated the ledger of it, and at 37 the pages were starting to show. I'd had a persistent fatigue for months that I attributed to the job and the season and the quality of sleep that decreases as you age. Night sweats I attributed to the radiator in my new apartment, which was not so different from the radiator in my first room, still knocking in the dark. I went to the doctor in March because my supervisor told me I looked like hell and that he needed me functional, which was the most emotionally direct anyone had been with me in years. The doctor sent me for blood work, then imaging, then more imaging, then a specialist. The specialist had the manner of someone who had delivered this kind of news many times, and had learned that the kindest way to do it was directly and without excessive preparation. Stage 4 lymphoma, she said. Advanced, spread to secondary sites. Treatment options existed, chemotherapy, targeted therapy, but at this stage they were managing rather than curing. She said, less than a year most likely. She said, I'm sorry. I sat in her office and I looked at the diplomas on the wall behind her because looking at her felt like too much, and I thought, less than a year. I thought, I have to decide what to do with that. I started chemotherapy in September. The chair was the thing I hadn't expected, how specific a piece of furniture it would become, how much of my remaining time would be organized around it. I was there every other Thursday. The nurses learned my name. A man named Gerald sat across from me most sessions, and we talked about baseball and the weather and sometimes nothing at all, which turned out to be its own kind of companionship. The Christmas music started in November. I sat in my chair and watched it snow outside the parking lot window, and I thought about my family for the first time in months, without trying to think about something else instead. I thought they don't know. I thought they would not want to know. Or they would not want to know from me, which amounted to the same thing. I thought about sending the box. The whole storage container, shipped to my mother's address, no return label. Everything inside it, 15 years of letters, every photograph, every card, every written down piece of a life I had lived in the wrong direction from everyone I loved. I thought about what it would do to them. To open a box and find 15 years of evidence that I had never left, not really, that I had been somewhere parallel to them the entire time, watching, missing, paying my father's medical bills with money I didn't tell anyone I was spending. I decided against the box, but I wrote one more letter. I wrote it on a Thursday evening in December, at my kitchen table, with bad coffee and the Christmas music from the hospital still moving through my head. I wrote it to all of them, not separate letters this time, one letter, addressed to the family. I wrote, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I'm sending it to the house because I don't know where else to send it. And I have been writing letters for 15 years that I never sent, and it seems wrong to end that way, to run out of time still holding them. I want you to know that I understand, what it looked like, what you believe. I want you to know that I never told you the truth, not because I was protecting myself, but because I was protecting someone I loved more than I was angry, and I would make the same choice again, because that is who I am, and I have spent 15 years being glad of it even when it cost me everything. I am not well. I won't explain more than that. I am not telling you this because I want anything from it. Not sympathy, not a visit, not a reopened conversation. I am telling you only because I am running out of time in which to tell you anything, and this seemed like the thing most worth saying. No matter what happened, no matter what you believed, I never stopped loving you. I never stopped. Merry Christmas, Ethan. I folded it, I addressed it. I set it on the kitchen table. In the morning it was still there. I looked at it for a long time. I put it in the storage container with the others. I closed the lid. Ethan Walker died on a Tuesday in February. He died in his apartment, which he had arranged for home hospice. A nurse named Patricia who came twice a day and had learned, by the end, to sit in the chair by his bed and read without feeling the need to fill the silence. He had asked her once if she found it strange, sitting with people at the end of things. She'd said not strange, just quiet. He'd said he thought that was exactly right. He left instructions with a lawyer, a young woman named Ms. Archer who had handled his modest estate with the seriousness she gave everything, which was considerable. His apartment contained furniture, books, the storage container under his bed, and 3 months of back rent already paid, which was the kind of thing Ethan had thought to do. Ms. Archer contacted the family in March. She arrived at his parents' house on a Saturday morning with a box, not the storage container itself, which she had transported separately, but the relevant documents, the death certificate, the simple will, and a note that said only, "Please open the container together when you are ready." Linda Walker opened the door. She did not recognize Ms. Archer's name. She did not immediately understand what she was being told. And then she did. She stood in her doorway for a long moment without speaking. And Ms. Archer, who was experienced enough to know that this was not a moment that required her to fill, waited. "He's gone," Linda said finally, not a question. "Yes," Ms. Archer said. "I'm sorry." Robert Walker came to the doorway behind his wife. He looked at the box. His face did something that Ms. Archer would describe to no one, because there are expressions that belong only to the people who make them and the people who witness them, and this was one of those. Sophia came that afternoon. She sat on her parents' living room floor and opened the storage container while her mother sat on the couch, and her father stood by the window, the same window Linda had noted without saying, where Ethan used to stand as a boy, looking at the yard. The container held 15 years of letters. Sophia lifted the first one. It was dated November 15 years ago, and it was addressed to their mother, and it began, "I want you to know that I don't blame anyone." She read 3 words and had to stop. She read 3 words and understood, with the particular clarity of someone who has spent 15 years not allowing themselves to understand something, exactly what she had done. What the letters were, what the storage container was, what 15 years of asterisk maybe next Christmas asterisk meant, written in marker on the side of a shoebox that had eventually outgrown itself. She sat on the floor for a long time without speaking. Her mother was reading over her shoulder now, and her father had come away from the window, and the 3 of them moved through the letters the way you move through something you cannot hurry, slowly, carefully, with the specific grief of people receiving something that arrived too late to be received properly. At the bottom of the container was the medical folder. Ms. Archer had placed it there with a paper clip and a note. "He wanted you to have the full picture." Robert Walker opened it. Stage 4 lymphoma. September diagnosis. Treatment records. The attending physician's notes, which were clinical and precise and contained a phrase, "Patient declined to notify family," citing desire not to create obligation, that Robert read twice. He set the folder down on the coffee table. He put his hand over his mouth. Sophia said, "Dad." He didn't respond. She said, in a voice that had been building for 15 years and had nowhere left to hold itself, "I lied." Her parents looked at her. "He didn't help me leave," she said. "He didn't know where I was. I called him from Jenna's after 2 months and made him promise not to tell. I made him promise." She stopped. "And when I came home, when Dad looked at him, I was scared. I was so scared. And he was just standing there, and I said it before I knew I was going to say it, and then—" She stopped again. "Then he didn't correct me," her mother said quietly. "No, because you asked him not to." Sophia looked at the letters in her lap. 15 years of her name appearing in her brother's handwriting, in Christmas cards he had written and addressed and never sent. "I kept thinking I would fix it," she said. "I kept thinking there would be a moment, and then a year passed and then 5, and it felt too late, and I told myself he was fine, he was somewhere being fine, and I—" Her voice broke cleanly. I didn't let myself think about whether he was fine, because if I thought about it, I would have had to do something about it. Robert Walker sat down. He sat down heavily in the armchair, the same armchair that had been in that room for 20 years, that Ethan had sat in as a teenager doing homework, as a young man watching football, as a son who had trusted his father's judgment completely. And he looked at his hands. Linda sat beside him. She did not say anything. She took his hand. He looked at the medical folder on the coffee table. He looked at the last letter, which Ms. Archer had placed on top and which was still sealed, which none of them had yet opened, which was addressed in Ethan's handwriting. For the family. Whenever you're ready. He looked at it for a long time. Then he reached for it. They went to the cemetery on Christmas Eve. Snow was falling, the particular soft snow of a windless winter evening, the kind that lands without sound and accumulates without hurry. The cemetery was quiet. Most people spent Christmas Eve elsewhere. A few candles had been left at nearby stones, small flames holding against the cold. Ethan's stone was simple. Linda had chosen it. His name, his dates, and a line she had taken from the third letter she'd read, I never stop. Robert carried a chair. It was from the dining room, the chair that had been Ethan's, the one they had moved to storage after he left, and that Linda had brought back out without explanation 6 months ago, which neither Robert nor Sophia had commented on, because sometimes you understand what a thing means without needing to say it. He set it beside the stone. Sophia set the last gift down, a wrapped box that she had found in the storage container, sealed, labeled in his handwriting, for whoever needs this most. Do not open until Christmas. Inside, they would later find a photograph, the 4 of them, Christmas morning the year before Sophia left. Ethan had printed it from somewhere and wrapped it and put it in a box and carried it with him through 4 apartments and 15 years and a terminal diagnosis, and had never stopped meaning to give it to them. Linda read the final letter out loud. Her voice was steady for the first 2 paragraphs. Then it was not. The letter said what he had wanted to say, that he understood, that he had never blamed them, that the silence had not been cowardice but something closer to its opposite. A choice made in love, renewed every year, held in a storage container under his bed through every city and every apartment, and every Christmas spent alone. It said, I want you to know that I was okay. Not always, but mostly. I built a life that fit me, even if it was smaller than the one I'd imagined. I had good work and decent coffee and a diner on Sunday mornings where someone knew my order. It said, I want you to know that I spent every Christmas wishing I could come home. It said, I never stopped loving you, not once, not for a single year. It said, Merry Christmas. Robert Walker read the medical records in the cold. He read the phrase, patient declined to notify family, citing desire not to create obligation. And he sat with it, and he looked at the stone with his son's name on it, and he thought about the years. The specific weight of 15 years. The Christmases that had happened inside the house he had built while his son had been somewhere parallel, buying cards and writing letters, and paying a medical bill that Robert had always assumed was covered by insurance. He thought about the morning he had said, You are no longer my son. He thought about what it had cost his son to hear that, and walk through the door anyway, and stay gone, and never stop loving them anyway. He stood and he placed his hand on the stone, just his palm flat against the cold granite, the way you touch something you cannot hold. He said, You spent 15 years trying to come home, and I spent 15 years keeping the door closed. His voice was barely above a whisper. The snow fell. Linda put her arms around him, and he let her. The way he rarely let anyone. The way a man allows himself to be held when he has finally run out of the particular pride that was keeping him upright. Sophia stood a few feet away with her face in her hands. She had been wrong about many things. She had been wrong about what she could outrun, and wrong about what 15 years could cover over, and wrong about the moment that was never going to arrive on its own, the one where she would finally correct the record and everything would be as it should be. She had been wrong about her brother. She had believed, without ever letting herself examine the belief, that he was somewhere fine, that people who chose silence were choosing something, were exercising some form of control that constituted a life. She understood now, reading his letters, that the silence had not been peace. It had been the noise of a person who loved his family so specifically and so stubbornly that he had kept saying so for 15 years into an empty box, waiting for a moment that never came. He had been waiting. They had never opened the door. The chair sat beside his stone, empty, snow accumulating on the seat in the particular slow way of something that has all the time in the world. the candles nearby held against the cold. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell began, Christmas Eve, the old signal, the one that had always meant that the day was changing into something else. Linda Walker lifted her face from her husband's shoulder. She looked at the empty chair. She thought about the crooked Christmas lights, the third strand, always slightly off from the others. She thought about how Sophia had complained about it every year, and how Robert had said I know, and how Ethan had never said a word about it, had just stood near the window and looked at the lights with an expression she had never examined closely enough. She understood now what the expression had been. It had been, "I love this," exactly as it is, even the crooked part. She had not known how to see that at the time. She would have to learn now to live with not having seen it. That was the particular punishment of this kind of loss, not the absence alone, but the retroactive weight of everything you'd misread, every moment you'd had and spent looking at the wrong thing. The bell finished, the snow fell, the chair remained empty, and Ethan Walker, who had spent 15 years carrying a love too large for the container of silence he'd kept it in, was finally home, in the only way left. The second week was worse than the first, not because the tasks were harder. David had, by now, developed a grudging competence with the basic mechanics of the household. He had learned the medication sheet. He had set a phone alarm for the school bus. He had discovered, after 2 failed attempts, that the washing machine had a specific cycle for darks that Emily had marked with a piece of tape she had apparently put there years ago for exactly this eventuality. The tape said, "Lucas's things." He had stood in the laundry room looking at that piece of tape for a long time. What made the second week worse was the accumulation. The first week had the quality of a novel problem, something to be solved, managed, navigated with the problem-solving instincts of a man accustomed to solving problems. The second week had no novelty. It was simply the same problems, returning with the relentless regularity of things that do not resolve because they are not problems to be solved, but conditions to be lived inside. Frank needed things. Lucas needed things. The house needed things. The list of 14 items in Emily's phone, which she had at David's request shared with him, had not shrunk. It had grown, because the list was not static. The list was alive, fed by the constant metabolic needs of 4 people and a house, and Emily had been feeding it every day for 15 years. David added items to the list. He crossed items off the list. The list remained approximately the same length. He began to understand, in the way that you understand something when you are living inside it rather than theorizing about it from outside, that this was not a job. It was not a role. It was an entire cognitive architecture, a parallel processing system that ran alongside every other part of a person's life, consuming attention and memory and anticipation in a continuous and uninterrupted stream. He had lived beside this architecture for 15 years. He had not once looked at it. It was Frank who said it. David had not expected it from Frank. Frank was not by nature a man who named things. He was of a generation and a temperament that processed the world through practical action rather than verbal acknowledgement. And in 6 years of living under the same roof, David could count on one hand the number of direct emotional observations his father had made. It was a Sunday afternoon. David was attempting to make the chicken soup from the recipe Emily had posted on the inside of the cabinet door. Another piece of tape. Another artifact of a system he had been blind to. And Frank was at the kitchen table with his reading glasses and his newspaper, which David had remembered to pick up from the front step, which he was now including in his mental list of accomplishments. He was cutting celery with the concentration of someone performing surgery. "She used to hum," Frank said. David looked up. Frank was looking at the newspaper. "Emily, when she cooked, she didn't always know she was doing it, just a sound under everything." He turned a page. "I haven't heard that in a long time, actually, before she left, I mean." David set down the knife. "Dad," Frank looked up. "What do you want to say?" Frank was quiet for a moment. He folded the newspaper with the deliberate care of a man who uses physical tasks to organize his thoughts. He set it on the table. He looked at his hands, the hands of a man who had worked with them his whole life, now spotted and slightly stiff. "She cared for me better than my own children did," he said. The kitchen was very still. "I know that's a hard thing to hear," Frank said. He said it without apology but also without cruelty, the simple delivery of a man who has decided that truth at 74 is more important than comfort. "Your sister calls once a month. You're here and you're a good son, David, that's not what I'm saying. But Emily," he paused. "Emily knew when my prescription needed refilling before the bottle was empty. She knew that I can't sleep if I've had caffeine after 2 o'clock. She knew that I have a hard time on the anniversary of your mother's death, and she always made sure that day was quiet, that there wasn't noise and activity. She never mentioned it. She just made sure. David was looking at the celery on the cutting board. I never thanked her, Frank said. Not properly. Not in the way that would have meant something. He picked up the newspaper again. I want you to know that I know that, and I want you to know that whatever is happening between you two, I'm on her side. He went back to reading. David stood at the counter for a long time. The soup took 2 hours. It was not as good as Emily's. He suspected it would never be as good as Emily's, and not because of any deficiency in the recipe, but because the recipe was only the visible part of something that also included the 1,000 small calibrations of someone who had made it dozens of times and knew, without measuring, how much was enough. He ate it anyway. He thought about the anniversary of his mother's death. He thought about whether he had ever noticed what Emily did on that day. He had not. The call came on Monday evening from Lucas's school. Not an emergency. The receptionist was careful to say that first, but a matter requiring parental attention. David drove to the school with the particular alertness of a parent who has been operating below the required attentiveness level and is aware of it. The school counselor, a woman named Ms. Park, was warm and direct. She had seen Lucas twice in the past 2 weeks, voluntarily, she said, which was notable because Lucas was not typically a student who sought out the counseling office. He's doing okay, she said. He's processing some things. He's been talking about his mom. David nodded. He's proud of her, Ms. Park said. I want you to know that. He talks about her in a way that suggests a very secure attachment. He knows she loves him. A pause. He's been thinking about some things that have made him feel guilty, about whether he showed her that he appreciated her. David looked at his hands. He's 17, Ms. Park said. This kind of reflection is healthy. I'm not concerned about him. I just thought you should know what he's carrying. He drove home without the radio. He thought about Lucas, about the fact that his son, his 17-year-old son who had grown up in this house, who had eaten the food and worn the clean clothes and found his lunch packed and his forms signed and his gym clothes washed, was sitting in a school counselor's office feeling guilty about what he hadn't given his mother. He thought about himself. He thought, if Lucas at 17 can see it. He didn't finish the thought. He pulled into the driveway. He sat in the car. He thought about the 15 years, about the dinners that had appeared, about the parties that had been organized, about the pill organizers and the prescription refills and the school event calendars and the tape on the washing machine and the broth behind the canned tomatoes, about the piece of himself that had sat across from Emily at the dinner table for 15 years and looked at her and seen what? A wife, a mother, someone who had the situation handled, someone who was good at this. He thought about the fact that he had never once in 15 years sat across from her and asked, "What do you need?" Not what does the house need? Not what do the kids need or what does Dad need? What do you need? He had not asked. He went inside. He went upstairs. He stood in front of the closet. He took down the navy notebook. He brought it to the kitchen table. He sat with it closed in front of him for several minutes. He thought about privacy. He thought about whether Emily would want him to read it. He thought about the fact that Emily had never hidden it. It was on an open shelf, not locked, not concealed, in the closet of the room where they both slept. He thought about whether that meant anything. He thought about Frank saying, "Whatever is happening between you two, I'm on her side." He opened the notebook. The first entry was dated 6 years ago. Her handwriting was small and precise, the same handwriting that was on the medication sheet and the laundry tape and the calendar and the inside of the cabinet door. He had seen this handwriting every day for 15 years, and it had never once struck him as the handwriting of a specific person with a specific interior life. It had been the handwriting of the house. He read. The entry from 6 years ago was about Frank's arrival. She had written about the decision, the practical decision, the one made at the kitchen table one evening with calm adult language about what was sensible and what was best for the family. She wrote about agreeing. She wrote about understanding that it was the right thing. And then she wrote, in a sentence that sat by itself at the bottom of the paragraph, "I didn't ask if I wanted to. I asked if it was right. I'm not sure I remember the difference anymore." He turned pages. He read, 4 years ago, Lucas's first year of high school. An entry about driving him to early practice 3 mornings a week for a semester and a half before the season ended. Not about the driving, about a conversation she'd tried to have with David, mentioned in passing early one morning that she was tired, that the early mornings were hard. He doesn't hear things when they're mentioned in passing, she had written. I've learned to mention them in passing anyway. It's easier than the alternative, which is to say it plainly and watch him not know what to do with it. This way we both pretend I haven't said anything, and I at least feel like I tried. He stopped reading. He sat with that paragraph. He read it again. He thought about all the things she had mentioned in passing. He could not recall a single one, not because he had decided not to hear them, because the mechanism she was describing, she had been right, completely and accurately right, was not something he had known existed. He hadn't known there were things being said in passing. He had not known there was a language being spoken just below the threshold of his attention. He had not known. He had not looked. He read on. 3 years ago, a birthday entry. Her own birthday, 40th. An entry written late at night, the handwriting slightly uneven in the way of someone writing tired. David took me to dinner. It was lovely. He chose the restaurant and made the reservation, and everything was beautiful. He gave me earrings. I said I loved them. I do love them. I also needed new running shoes. I mentioned it in October. I'm not sure he heard. I bought them myself in November. I'm wearing them now while I write this. He would have bought them if I'd asked directly. I know that. He would have found the right ones and wrapped them carefully and been pleased with himself. I know that. But I wanted him to have heard me in October. I wanted not to have to ask. David put his hand flat on the page. He sat very still. Outside, the November night was quiet. The house was quiet. Frank was asleep upstairs. Lucas was in his room. He read, 2 years ago, the entry where she had counted the tasks. She had made a list. It covered 2 full pages. Not dramatized, not arranged for effect, simply listed, in the systematic way of someone who had decided to document something that had been invisible for too long. At the bottom she had written, I counted 112. I stopped because I was tired, and because I realized that the point wasn't the number. The point was that I could make a list like this, 2 pages, small handwriting, and David would be surprised by it. He would be surprised because he doesn't know. And he doesn't know because I have managed everything so well for so long that the management has become invisible. I made the invisible. I built the invisible piece by piece, task by task. And now I am inside it and I don't know how to get out. I don't think I even know what out would look like. He turned to the last entry. It was recent, 2 weeks before she left. Written in the morning, he could tell by the light reference, the kitchen in the early hours. I had dizziness again today. I didn't tell David. I was going to. I stood at the counter with his coffee in my hand and I thought, I will tell him. And then I looked at his face. He was reading something on his phone, the expression he has when he's already somewhere else before he's left. And I thought, if I tell him, he'll say, are you okay? And I'll say, I think so, and he'll say, you should rest. And I'll say I will, and then he'll leave, and I'll manage the day the way I always manage the day. I didn't want to have that conversation again. I didn't want to be fine again. I just wanted, I'm not sure I know how to finish this sentence. I've been trying to finish it for years. I wanted to be seen, not helped necessarily, not fixed, not thanked. Even the thanks are there in their way and I know they're genuine. I just wanted him to look up from his phone. Really look, not at everything I've done or everything I manage. At me. David closed the notebook. He sat at the kitchen table in the quiet house and looked at the calendar on the wall and the medication sheet on the refrigerator and the tape on the washing machine that said Lucas's things, and the cabinet with the recipe inside the door and the shelf with the pill organizer and the tray. He sat there for a long time. He was not crying. He was past that or before it, in a place that was too large and too still for tears. He was in the particular space that opens up when a person understands something they cannot ununderstand, something that reorganizes everything that came before it. He thought about Emily at the kitchen table at midnight after the dinner party. He thought about her on the kitchen floor. He thought about the 43rd entry, the one with the sentence she hadn't finished. He thought about 15 years. He picked up his phone. He did not call. He went to the cabinet. He found the keys to the car. He got his coat from the hook by the door, the hook Emily had installed because he kept leaving his coat on the banister, a fact he had not known until this moment, standing with his coat in his hand, because she had simply solved the problem without mentioning it. He left a note for Lucas on the kitchen table. Gone to see Mom. Back tomorrow. Frank's meds are ready on the tray. Call if you need anything. He drove south toward Tacoma. The drive was an hour. He did not listen to the radio. He thought about the running shoes. He thought about the mornings with the celery and the soup and the grocery list and the bus alarm and the laundry tape. He thought about the way she had stood in the doorway with her carry-on bag, the smallness of it, the thing that had disturbed him at the time without his understanding why. He understood now. The bag was small because she had spent 15 years putting everything into the house and had almost nothing left that was only hers. He drove through the Tacoma streets he only half knew. Emily had made this drive to see her mother, and he tried to remember the last time he had come with her. He couldn't place it. A year ago, maybe, 2. He had been busy. He was always busy. He had always had a reason. The house was a small craftsman on a quiet street with a maple in the front yard that had dropped most of its leaves onto the lawn. The porch light was on. He sat in the car in front of it for a moment. He thought, I don't have a speech. He had come without a speech, without a plan, without the prepared language he normally brought to difficult conversations, the controlled framing, the managed revelation of information. He had none of that. He had the notebook. He had the 112 tasks. He had the running shoes she'd mentioned in October and bought herself in November. I just wanted him to look up from his phone. He got out of the car. Emily answered the door in the old pullover, the one she wore for mornings. She had a book in her hand, an actual book which he registered with a dim surprise, because he had not seen her read for pleasure in longer than he could account for. She looked at him, David, not alarmed, not unwelcoming, the careful neutrality of a woman who has learned to wait before she reacts. I read the notebook, he said. A pause, something moved across her face, brief, unguarded. You left it on the shelf, he said. I know that's not permission, but I read it. He paused. I couldn't stop. She looked at him for a long moment. She stepped back. He came inside. Margaret Marsh had gone to bed. The small house was warm and lamplit, the particular warmth of a house managed by an older woman who had learned what mattered. There were photographs on the mantel, books on every surface, a cup of tea going cold on the side table. Emily sat across from him. He had not planned what he would say. He found, sitting across from her, that this was correct, that a plan would have been the wrong thing to bring. The running shoes, he said. She looked at him. You mentioned them in October. 3 years ago, I didn't hear. He held her gaze. I have spent this week since you left learning where Frank's broth is, learning how the laundry works, learning that the coffee machine needs to be filled the night before. He paused. I missed Lucas's showcase. I know, she said quietly. I found the tape on the washing machine. Something changed in her expression. Small, involuntary. I read the entry about the dinner party, he said. The one where you said you used to give presentations to boardrooms. He stopped. I said you stayed home now. I said it in front of people who used to know you as someone else, and I said it like it was a simple fact. She was looking at him steadily, not forgiving him yet, not refusing to, waiting. I didn't see you, he said. Not for a long time. I'm not going to tell you I know when it started or why. I think it was gradual. I think you managed everything so well that I stopped registering that managing was happening. And I think, he stopped. I think I let myself not register it, because registering it would have meant doing something about it. And doing something about it would have meant changing, and I didn't. He stopped again. I didn't want to change. The lamp on the side table made a small warm circle. Emily looked at her hands. You read the last entry, she said. Yes. A pause. Then you know what I wanted, she said. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't complicated. She looked up. I just wanted you to look up. I know, he said. Not at the house, not at everything I'd done, at me. I know. She looked at him. I'm not sure it's that simple now, she said. To just look up. It's been 15 years, David. I have spent 15 years becoming invisible in a life that I chose and then stopped choosing because I forgot I was allowed to choose. I forgot I had a self that existed separately from the house and the family and She stopped. I forgot that I was a person first. I know, he said again. He said it differently this time, not as an agreement, as an acknowledgement of the specific weight of what she was saying. She looked at him. Dr. Chen told me the conditions need to change structurally, she said. Not temporarily, that's what I need. Not an apology and 2 good weeks and then back to the way things were. I can't go back to the way things were. I'm not asking you to. I need to be able to say I'm tired without it being mentioned in passing, she said. I need to have the thing I say heard. She paused. I need to be able to want something and have the wanting of it be noticed before I ask, not always. Just sometimes. She looked at the middle distance. I just wanted to feel like a person who lived in that house, not a system that ran it. The room was quiet. The running shoes, David said. She looked at him. I can't go back and buy them in October, he said. I know that. I know I can't fix the 15 years. I'm not going to tell you that I can. He paused. But I want to learn where you put things, not where the broth goes, where you put things. He held her gaze. What you need, what you want, what you were going to say before you decided to mention it in passing. Emily looked at him for a long time. She looked at him in the way she had not looked at him in years. Not through the lens of the house, or the family, or the accumulated weight of the role. She looked at him as a person looking at another person, which was how they had looked at each other once, a long time ago, before the life had grown up between them. She said, I want to go back to work. He nodded. Not because we need the money, because I need to be somewhere that I'm valued for something I'm building, not something I maintain. She paused. I want to have that back. Okay, he said. That means the house changes. How things are distributed changes. I'm not going to manage everything anymore. I need you to manage things, actively. Not because I ask you to, but because you see that they need managing. Okay. And Frank, she paused. Frank needs more than we can give him, David. He needs professional care, not instead of family with family. A part-time aide at minimum. Someone whose job it actually is. I should have said this 2 years ago. I'll look into it this week, he said. She looked at him. Something in her expression shifted, not quite trust yet, but the beginning of trust, the cautious precursor to it. This isn't a conversation that fixes things, she said. You know that. I know. It's going to take a long time. I know. I'm still angry, she said quietly. Not at you specifically, at all of it, at how long it went on, at how long I let it go on. She paused. I'm angry at myself too. You shouldn't be, he said. I know that intellectually, she almost smiled. It'll take a while to feel it. He looked at her. He looked at her the way he should have been looking at her for years. Not at the function, not at the role, not at everything she managed and maintained and held together. At her. At Emily Marsh, who had given presentations to boardrooms. At Emily Carter, who had hummed while she cooked and had stopped humming without anyone noticing. I miss hearing you hum, he said. She looked at him. Dad mentioned it, he said. He said you used to hum in the kitchen and he hadn't heard it in a long time. He paused. I realized I hadn't noticed. I hadn't noticed you'd stop. She was quiet. I'll come home when Mom is ready, she said finally. Not before, and when I come home, she paused. Things will be different. I need them to be different. They will be, he said. She looked at him, measuring the weight of the words. I'd like to believe that, she said. I know, he said. I know you have no particular reason to. He held her gaze. I'm asking you to give me the chance to show you, not to trust me, not yet, just to come home and see. She was quiet for a long time. Outside, the November night was still. The maple in the front yard stood bare and patient against the dark sky, the way trees stand through things they did not ask for and cannot change. I'll come home, she said, not warmly, not coldly. In the even, deliberate way of a person who is making a decision with full awareness of its cost and its risk and its possibility. Thank you, he said. She looked at him once more. Then she stood and said she needed to sleep and showed him the small guest room where he could stay. And he said good night. And she said good night. And she went down the hall to her mother's house where she had been sleeping for 2 weeks and where, he suspected, she had been sleeping better than she had in years. He sat in the guest room in the quiet house. He thought about the notebook, about the 112 tasks, about the entry that ended I wanted to be seen. He thought about tomorrow and the day after and all the ordinary days that would need to be different. Not dramatically, not with gestures or speeches, but in the small, practiced way of a person who has decided to look up from their phone and keep looking. He thought about the tape on the washing machine that said Lucas's things. He thought about how long she had been leaving notes like that. He thought, I will learn to read them. He turned off the light. She came home on a Wednesday. She came through the door with her carry-on and her tote and set them in the hallway and stood for a moment looking at the house. David had cleaned. Not perfectly, she could see the things he'd missed, the places where the cleaning had been done by someone still learning where to look. But he had tried. That was visible, too. Lucas came downstairs. He stood at the bottom of the steps and looked at her, and then did what he had not done since he was about 11 years old. He walked up and hugged her without being prompted. A real hug, long enough to mean something. I'm sorry, Mom, he said, muffled. She held him. You don't need to be sorry, she said. You're 17. You were supposed to be taking care of yourself. That's what 17 is for. He pulled back. His eyes were slightly red. He looked embarrassed about that in the specific way of teenage boys. Ms. Park says I should tell people when I appreciate them, he said. So, he looked at her. I appreciate you. I have always appreciated you. I was just terrible at showing it, she said. Yeah, "You're working on it," she said. "Yeah." She touched his face briefly, the quick, light touch of a mother who knows her son is almost grown and is not going to make more of a moment than he can handle. He accepted it. Then he went back upstairs because he was 17, and she understood. Frank was in the kitchen. He looked up when she came in. His expression was the expression of a man who has thought about what he wants to say and has decided to say it plainly. "Welcome home," he said. She sat across from him. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Frank, I do. I took things for granted that I shouldn't have. I knew it at the time, and I didn't say so, and that was wrong." He looked at her directly. "You have been more present for me than my own family. That is not a small thing, and I let it go unnamed for too long." She looked at him. "Thank you," she said. It was not a small thing, either, the naming of it. She had not known how much she needed to hear it until she heard it. David came in from the back door with a grocery bag. He saw her. He set the bag on the counter and looked at her the way he had looked at her in her mother's living room. Not at the house, not at what needed managing at her. "You're home," he said. "I'm home," she said. She stood at the kitchen table and looked at the room. The pill organizer on the tray. The medication sheet on the refrigerator. The calendar on the wall with its careful entries, some in her handwriting, some in David's, newer, less certain. He had been adding to the calendar. She stood in the kitchen and looked at the new entries in his handwriting, and something moved in her that was not forgiveness yet, not entirely, but was adjacent to it. The recognition that a thing she had believed fixed was in the process of changing, slowly and imperfectly, and in the way of real things rather than decided things. She thought about the hum. She thought about standing at the stove in the early mornings, and whether she would ever stand there again with the ease of someone who is where they want to be. She thought maybe, not yet, but maybe. She put her bag down. She went to the counter. She made coffee, not for anyone in particular, for herself. She poured a cup and stood at the counter and drank it while it was still hot, which was something she had not done in longer than she could remember. And she looked out the window at the backyard in the November gray, and thought about the woman who had stood in this kitchen before 6 a.m. for 15 years and made everything run and been invisible inside all of it. She thought, "I see her now," and that, she understood, was where it had to start. Not with David seeing her, though that mattered. Not with Lucas's apology, though that had moved her deeply. Not with Frank's acknowledgement, though she would carry it for a long time. It had to start here, with her, with the woman in the kitchen who had forgotten she was allowed to have coffee while it was still hot, and who was, slowly, in the imperfect and unglamorous way of real recovery, remembering. She held the cup in both hands. Outside, the bare maple in the backyard stood in the November morning, patient and still. She stood there. She let herself be still too. And somewhere in the house behind her, 3 people who loved her imperfectly and were learning to love her better went about the ordinary business of a Wednesday morning. And the house held all of them, and it was hers too. It had always been hers. She was just learning to live in it again.